everything you do from then on is different.
One of the detectives, I think his name was
He was
Derek.
a golden boy.
And all we can do right now is come together.
Extreme domestic violence, multiple rapes.
It's great to have you here on Life Support, and we're going to be talking about more important issues today, and I have a very special guest here. It's Julie Hall, who is a therapist in private practice. She specializes in many of the things that we want to talk about, grief and anxiety and depression and all of those types of things, and we're going to help you maybe get some tools to walk through this pandemic as you're, like many of us, trying to find your way along, and it's difficult. But first, we want to hear a story that Julie has gone through to kind of set the stage, and it's not an easy story to tell, and I really appreciate you being here, Julie. It's nice of you to come by. Take us into your story, and did your story feed into who you are now and what you do for a living?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I love being here, and I love your program. I'm going to start out telling my story when it starts 20 years ago, and then it will definitely answer that question. I'm definitely a different person than I was 20 years ago as a result of the story that God had written. It definitely is not a story I would have written. And having said that, I also know it's written by his pen, and I do believe that it's the larger story that he wants me to be a part of. So I will start my story 20 years ago. I married the love of my life. I married this man that had a great big smile and an even bigger heart. He was just a really stellar human being. He was a man of faith. 2 years later, we welcomed our son into our life. And when I met Ken, he had two teenage children. So we were a family of 5 and a blended family. And I love how God just builds families. And I pretty much had a very protected, sweet little life and sweet little world, and my worldview was tiny, and it was completely rocked and completely shaken when we found out that Ken, who was young and healthy and a long-distance runner, was diagnosed with a rare form of lung cancer. So we were completely destroyed and devastated, and how we chose to deal with that news was how we really chose to do almost everything. We, went to the Lord in prayer, we begged, we lamented, we prayed, and then we went into action. And this was a man that wanted to live so, so badly. So we put my son in the care of friends, and we traveled all over the country to try to find help for him in a clinical trial or a new miracle drug or, just any of those sorts of things that we could do for him. And none of those things were happening. And in the 18 months that he went through this trial and eventually went into the arms of Jesus in 2013, he was such an exemplary person in his faith. He really believed that, he would be the miracle. He really believed that he was going to be that guy that would be able to tell that story. And it was a different story that he got to tell, and God did heal him. He healed him in heaven. He did not heal him on earth. So that was definitely for me, as I was the surviving spouse, a really, really hard thing, a crisis in my faith. Again, like I said, my perfect little world was just rocked and shattered, and I didn't do so well. The first year, so many things happened that continued to shake my world, and I continued to really have to search my heart and search for God, and it didn't really feel like he was there. So Ken died in February of 2013. My son and I were in a serious car accident shortly after that, and our car was totaled. We both walked away without a scratch, emotionally scarred, but absolutely physically intact. And a couple months after that, it was Father's Day, and my son had been at a sleepover up the street with his best friend, Jake, and I was watching my friend's 1-year-old, and it's Sunday morning. I'm ready to go to church, and I've got the baby, and I start to walk outside, and I see Jake, my son's little friend, running down the street in his pajamas in his bare feet. And I knew, my heart just sunk. I knew this was not good and this was too weird. And so he said, Sam is in an ambulance and you need to come. So I ran up the street and I did catch the ambulance and I handed the baby over and I got in the ambulance with Sam. And he had lost consciousness. He was just barely 12 years old at this time. And, you know, the irony and the other layer of just pain was this was Father's Day. This was the first Father's Day without his dad. And we are in an ambulance going to Children's Hospital because my son is unconscious. So we got to Children's Hospital and they got him stabilized, and he had had a grand mal seizure. And he had he was another really healthy guy. He had had no symptoms whatsoever in the 12 years of his young life. And I remember stepping outside of his room at the hospital. You know, it's like the round area where the nurse's station is. And I remember stepping out, and I remember shaking my fist and looking up at God and saying, "You took Ken. You can't have him. I will not let you." And I can tell you, you know, there have only been very few times in my life when I have had complete and utter despair that I really know what despair means, and that was one of them. I honestly could not get my head around the fact that all of this was happening in such a short period of time. So this was what I call in my work, when I work with grieving people, this is cumulative grief. This is a layer of grief, and this is a multiple succession of losses. You're not even able to go through and make meaning from your prior loss, and you are hit with another serious loss. So my journey has been really, really difficult. I can say, walking the parallel path of joy and suffering, God has been faithful. If anyone hears anything I have to say today, it is He never left me. I wrestled with Him. I lamented. I used my faith in an active way to say, show me in your word. How am I supposed to keep going? And so it really forced me, I think the closest I have ever been to God was when I was at that loneliest point in that year. The other thing that happened in that year, I was sexually assaulted by someone I knew. This was a family friend. And I was extremely vulnerable, and I was extremely sad. And that, again, was another reason to really doubt what I was doing here and what God had planned for me. So, you know, as I said earlier about God writing our story, and I believe my story is a part of the larger redemptive story of God's plan. And I do think God is using my story and all of our stories as we share it and glorify Him to point people to Jesus. That's what I would like you to see in my story. I clung to Jesus, you know, that Jesus was all I had. And I realized Jesus was all I needed. That is what I needed. Everything else I was going to, you know, be able to go back to the Word. And I had to believe, it didn't look like it. It didn't look like I had God with me, but I had to go back to the promises, and I had to trust the unseen, and I had to keep doing that. And it wasn't easy, and I wasn't really good at it. But I had to train it over my heart. I had to keep going back and saying, every morning when I got up, I choose to believe your promises. I don't see you, I don't hear you right now, but I choose to believe your promises. Hebrews 12:2 says, fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So if He's perfecting my faith, I need to be yielded to Him and be in that posture. I can't make this happen. I can't slap a scripture on it any more than I can for someone else and say, pray harder. You know, that's a part in the story in the 18 months that Ken was sick that was really, really difficult. We were very active in our church, and we were walking this journey with another family, another couple, and he had a very similar lung cancer. His, however, was different in the fact he had his one lobe removed, and he was able to. He's still alive today, and Ken has been gone 7 years. And both families believers, both families, you know, really trusting in God, very similar medical diagnoses, completely different outcomes. And so I remember a couple people that came to pray with us when Ken was really sick towards the end. And someone said to me, you know, if your faith were stronger, he would be healed. If you can pray more, God will heal him. Increase your faith. And those sorts of things. And, I didn't think about it back then because I was so in the moment of the pain and just, myo-focused just on Ken. But now when I look back on that, I think, God really protected me from that hurt. But that was a really, really hurtful, unhelpful, unbiblical thing to say, as I know now when I look back on it. So what that does for me now when I come along people that are in the last stages of death, and I have worked as a hospital chaplain, so I have sat with people and I have walked in the valley of the shadow of death with many, many people. And, what God has shown me there is it's simply a ministry of presence. I can't fix them. I can't put a silver lining on their story, but I can just be Jesus with skin on by sitting there next to them and just being. And I know it's...
But we desperately want to fix people. And I've been exactly where you are. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. You can't fix this.
Right.
This is God's thing.
Mm-hmm.
And really what it comes down to is it's you and God. Others can come alongside of you. But people in America, I think, just want us to snap our fingers, come back to the way you were, let's get this over with, let's move on. And that's where all of that bad theology comes from, I think, and a lot of that pressure. And you really felt that. Mm-hmm. And that's something more that you have to deal with. And all of a sudden the sufferer then becomes the one who has to teach, the one who has to show others, right?
Right. I love that you said that because, you may have experienced this too. It became where I had to console people. I had to make them feel better about the fact that they didn't know what to say. Right?
Right.
And, the other things that people said, which, I really believe, and I want to believe from this posture, that people have good intentions. We have no grief fluency. We have no grief literacy in this country. We need to rebrand what it is. It's not the enemy. It's not, it is something that is going to happen to everyone. It is inevitable. It's not, if you will grieve. It's when you will grieve. So again, this is a really good place to say the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I think this is so huge, and yet I think it's so overlooked because we're trained our entire life how to acquire things, how to get the job, how to get the guy, how to get the girl, how to get the promotion once we got the job, and so we're taught, and our culture, comes alongside and reinforces that. But no one ever teaches us, what do we do when we lose something, And I think that's a really hard thing. But the sympathy, empathy. Okay, empathy is sorrowing with someone. Sympathy is sorrowing for someone. And just the very nature of that, empathy is picture coming alongside, being next to someone. And sympathy is, I feel so badly for you. That's not my story. I don't know anything. It's a whole different dynamic, and it sets a whole different tone. So if you start out with, at least, that is not sympathy, and that is not empathy. At least, people said to me, you're young, you'll get married again. I just had a friend that had a miscarriage. Someone said to her, at least you can get pregnant. Someone else, a friend of ours, their couple is going through a divorce, and someone said to her, at least you were married for a while. I haven't been married. So if it starts out...
At least your son's in heaven.
Yeah, exactly, Paul. Exactly. You heard that?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter at that moment. I mean, it matters.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take the pain away.
No.
So I understand exactly where you're going with that.
Yeah.
But don't you think that comes from... I mean, I think you're right. I think people mean well. But that's where bad theology begins to emerge too, because there's this feeling that God couldn't be in that if it's not what we would consider to be good or the right plan. Or, we moved and I got this job and I got fired and that couldn't have been God's plan. Or, that man lived and my husband didn't, so that couldn't be God's plan. And we've got God in this box, it seems, right? And God's doing whatever he's doing for his good purposes. And that's where faith grows from. But it's really hard, painful.
It's really hard and really painful. And again, I'm so glad you said that because it moves you, at least in my situation, I'll speak for myself, it moved me to a place where I actually know I don't get to know everything about everything that he has. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to admit because, we're self-sufficient people. We're, high-capacity people. But no, he says that's where it comes in. I mean, if I could fix the people that I see in my practice, why would they need a savior if I could come in and rescue them? I can't. I can sit with them in their pain. I can point them to Jesus. I can give them actual tangible resources and tools to cope. But I can't.
What would you say to someone that's listening right now who is going through some kind of a loss and the church has become an unsafe place for them? Their friend group has pulled away from them, or they feel like they're being pressured by the people they once could be transparent with, and they're lonely and they're isolated. What could be a first step toward engaging others or engaging their friend group again or moving toward Christ? What would you say to them?
I would say, first of all, being able to identify a safe person. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and whether that safe person be someone you work with or someone at church or someone in your friend group, someone, again, and you will know this person is a safe person because here's what they won't do. They won't try to fix you. They won't try to give you advice. They won't sugarcoat your pain. You will know a safe person. A safe person will be able to sit with you when you're having a big, messy emotion. They, think of it this way. I like to say, I hope everyone has a life team, but it's not realistic that everyone has a life team. So if you could just have a life person, if you could find that one person, again, that can be your container, that can sit with you in all of it and just be okay with you not being okay. I think the biggest feeling that we can ever get that we matter is when we feel listened to, when we actually feel heard. And it requires very little words come to find out. It's really finding that person that can be with you.
So narrow it down,
mm-hmm.
and don't feel guilty for not having everybody in that safe place, because people will make you feel like they deserve to be in your space. But they don't, do they?
No, they don't. And actually, it goes back to what I said earlier. There will be people we will come along in our story with that have the grief fluency, is what I call it. They have been through something hard. So mm-hmm. they are going to show up differently for you. They are going to have that empathy, whether they actually know that or not. But there are those people that have their parents and their grandparents and have not experienced loss at any level. They will most likely not be the person that will be your safe person.
I always struggled with, and I still do, how much do I talk about it, and when are people going to get tired of me talking about it? And that makes it hard to interact with people at times because it's such a large part of who I am, the events that have happened in my life, that I want people to get tired of me. Does that make any sense?
Totally makes sense. And I've been in your shoes, exactly. So C.S. Lewis has this excerpt in one of his books, and he said after he lost his wife, he felt like he was a death head. Like when people saw him coming, they were like, oh man, we're going to be talking about this all over again. And I feel like, there's just that tension that I so relate to you with. It's like, oh my gosh, I would love to talk about Ken all day long. And do I talk too much about him? And I asked a friend, and she's like, no, you actually think you do. And I thought, you know what? I must be having all those conversations. I'm talking to him in my head. So I'm really not like burning you out. And she said, no, you're really not. But I also think if you are a person that does at any stage that you're in your grief needs to talk about your loved one excessively, find that person that can listen and do it. Please give yourself permission to do it.
So let's just, in the short time we have left in this time we have together, by the way, my guest is Julie Hall, and she's kind enough to be here. She's a therapist in private practice and is telling her own story about the loss of her husband, Ken, and some other issues that she's been dealing with. I guess let's go back to Jesus again. What specifically have you learned about Jesus through this time of trial in your life where you can look back and go, that I kind of knew that before, but wow, that's really become real to me now?
I think the highlight of that, the answer to that question is he has shown me that people are the delivery system of his grace. He uses us. This is what this is why my story is the way it is. This is what he has for me right now in this season. So he uses people that are completely unqualified, and he equips and qualifies, and he calls. And, not every need is a call. That's another thing he really impressed upon me, because, I want to help everyone and I want to do everything. And he says, no, he says, hold back, listen to me, stay close to me, and I will show you where I want you to be working right now. And the other thing is too, the scripture in Galatians, bear one another's burdens to fulfill the law of Christ. That's, I believe, what we're actually here. That's our purpose.
And as you heal, I guess is, I don't know, that's a relative term, but as time begins to give you some space between the actual event, you do end up integrating back into the larger group, because then you get coping skills and you kind of know how to manage that better. So if there is someone right now that's saying, wow, like, I'm going to be stuck in this place forever. No, you won't. God will give you the skills to help you kind of reintegrate into real life, if you want to put it that way. And I think that's hopeful for people, because when this has just happened, you do feel like the world is stopped at times.
Absolutely.
Sure.
It is an out-of-body experience. It truly is. So I just want to say quickly, too, there's that old adage that time heals all wounds. I want to say to the audience, that is a crock. That is not true. Here's what time does. Time gives us space to reflect, to pray, to wrestle, to lament. Time is your friend right now. It may not seem like it, but I will say for sure, if you want to run ahead and not go through processing your grief and not journey through it and avoid it, it's going to come out sideways, and it's not going to be the healthy place you want to move toward.
Yeah, that's good counsel as well. And for me, I found that at each kind of point in my progression after my wife's death and after my son's death, that I had a specific choice to make. It was either toward God or away from God. And I'm just thankful that it was God protecting me, because I very well could have made wrong choices all along the way. So God is also really involved with this process. It's not just up to us. Thank goodness, right?
Thank goodness. Yes, for sure.
Well, Julie, we're going to talk more when we get together next time about dealing with trauma and grief in the middle of this pandemic and all of those kinds of crazy issues. But I just want to thank you for your transparency. I'm really sorry that you've had to go through what you have, but your story is helping a lot of people, so thanks for telling it. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
This is Life Support, and what we do here is we tell stories to help you find a deeper relationship with Christ through suffering and through trauma. And I want to thank our wonderful partners for Life Support. It's made possible by Faith Radio, which is www.myfaithradio.com, or Five Stone Media at fivestonemedia.com. That's where you can see a visual version of this. And then it's also produced by the church that I work with, Ridgewood Church, at myrwc.org. And you can follow me on Twitter at Pastor Paul J. Would love to see you there. We've been talking a lot about Christ and who he is in the middle of suffering. But when the chips are down, we find out who God really is. And in Isaiah 41:10, the Bible tells us, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And so let me encourage you that you are not alone, that it may seem dark, it may seem hopeless, but God is still working, and he's summoning you to a deeper relationship with him. So thanks for being here. We really do appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time on Life Support.